making dua, right? The praises that we do before that, and then if you're in the state of tahara, if you're facing the qibla, if you have finished in prayers, if you've done it in prostrations, all these things are an expression of that submission. Now, when that glad tiding came, there are 5 things that were associated with Yahya alayhi salam, right? So the first thing is, Inna Allah yubashshiruka bi Yahya. Allah is giving glad tidings with Yahya. So who named him? Allah, right? But the name has a beautiful inclination. So Yahya comes from what? La, haya, life, right? But this is not referring to the physical life only. So Yahya over here, which means he's informing Zakaria alayhi salam that this child will live. Back then, the mortality rates are very high. Your children are not necessarily going to survive. But over here, he called him Yahya. This is a physical aspect. But there's another life that's associated with that name, right? So there's they say al-haya al-hissiyya wal-ma'nawiyya. Hissiyya, which is the tangible, right? The tangible life. Wal-ma'nawiyya is the untangible, right? The untangible is the unseen. These are the meanings. And so over here, it's referring that Yahya has actually both forms of life, the tangible, the physical, but also the other form of life, the untangible, is referring to the life of the heart, right? And so over here, what's indicating is that Yahya alayhi salam will be an individual who is virtuous, who's not going to be a person who's astray, that his heart is alive, right? His spirit is alive. And that is a beautiful glad tidings. So there's characteristics that would make any father happy with, with that child that comes. Because not every child is a blessing, right? A child that was blessed with, a heart that's alive, that's clinging to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a soothe of the eye in this world and the hereafter. But a child that doesn't have these characteristics, and wal'audhu billah, is a person who's astray, that would usually bring harm to the fathers, right, or the parents, right? There's more harm to them than, it's not a blessing. It becomes more of a test, a tribulation, a trial, right? And so, but this, this it's referring to over here the hearts of life, similar how the iman brings life to our hearts. Sins would destroy our hearts, right? Would just it's a poison to our hearts and so forth. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, another verse, He said, "Lam naj'al lahu min qablu samiyya," right? We have not named any individual before with that name. So Yahya was the first person to be named with that name. So that is the first, the first characteristic or the first thing that was mentioned in that glad tiding, that he is Yahya, right? So I want you to look at those characteristics inshallah mentioned, and you can see how happy that would make Zakaria alayhi salam, right? So first he is Yahya. So it's not just a child, but he would be a child that would live, right? Because of the physical means that are there, the tangible, but also the intangible, that this person would be righteous. Now, not just that. He said, مُصَدِّقًا بِكَلِمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. مُصَدِّقًا بِكَلِمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. And over here, what it means is that he will believe in the kalima from Allah. What does that mean? Who's kalimatullah? Huh? Sorry? Not Musa. Musa's Kalimullah. Kalimatullah is Isa. Isa. Musaddiqan bi kalimatin min Allah. That's one of the interpretations, right? That he will believe in Isa ibn Maryam. Now that's the majority of scholars of tafsir. They say that this is referring to Isa ibn Maryam, and we know that Yahya and Isa ibn Maryam were at the same time, right? And they were one is a messenger, the other one is a prophet, right? So Isa alayhi salam was the messenger and Yahya was the prophet, but they were cousins. So the mothers were sisters. So the wife of Zakaria alayhi salam was the sister of Maryam. Was the sister of Maryam. It was mentioned that Isa was older than Yahya, but it's indicating that essentially what this verse is saying is like the glad tidings is telling to the Zakaria that you will have a child. His name is Yahya. he will have iman in his heart, and he will believe in a prophet, which means he will be a Muslim, essentially, right? He will be a Muslim, that he will follow the prophet of that time. Now, by the way, this had a huge implication on Bani Israel, right? Because over here, this is a prophet, they believed in another prophet, right? It's almost like being supported. And it had a huge, implication on Bani Israel. Unfortunately, some of them followed Isa ibn Maryam, but others refused. But one thing that kind of, it points out to over here is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is highlighting specific things. So over here is highlighting the life of the heart of Yahya, but also that he'll be a believer. He's a Muslim. And the prophets, this is what they cared about the most. This is what they cared about the most. And I want you to contrast that to nowadays many of the Muslim parents, what their focus is on, right? You'll find that many of the parents are very focused on the secular education, the secular component of things that would bring them, this world. But the religious aspect, they sometimes are not as keen about it, and sometimes would neglect it. And one way or another, to some aspects, we're all guilty of this. Right? We're all guilty of this one way or another sometimes. But over here, Zechariah and many of the other prophets, right? What they care about is the righteousness of their offsprings. This is why, for example, Yaqub alayhi salam, at his time of death, right? One thing that he cared about, he didn't care about inheritance, because prophets don't leave behind inheritance that is a form of wealth. So he gathered his children. He said, إذ حضر يعقوب الموت إذ قال لبنيه يا بني ما تعبدون إذ بني ما تعبدون من بعدي إذ حضر يعقوب اليوم إذ قال لبنيه ما تعبدون من بعدي. What do you worship after me? So what is he focused on? Tawheed, right? Their Islam, their righteousness, right? And also they said قالوا نعبد إلهك وإله أبائك إبراهيم وإسحاق, right? And so we were going to believe in that one Lord, the Lord of your fathers, Ibrahim and Ishaq, right? So that was the concern of Yaqub alayhi salam, right? And so the concern is he going to be a believer or not a believer? But over here, the glad tiding was given to Zechariah alayhi salam, is that this person will have a live heart. He will avoid sins, right? He will be a believer and he will follow a prophet, right? Now, once again, that belief of Yahya alayhi salam following Ismail alayhi salam had a huge impact on Bani Israel. But one thing we should take from this is that whenever we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for children, right, we should always ask for righteous children, right? هَبْ لِي مِن لَدُنْكَ ذُرِّيَّةً طَيِّبَةً. Right? طيبة is a good offspring, right? And the tayyib, which means beautiful, children that are righteous. And that's the dua that Yaqub alayhi salam, Zechariah alayhi salam made, right? فَهَبْ لِي مِن لَدُنْكَ ذُرِّيَّةً طَيِّبَةً إِنَّكَ سَمِيعُ الدُّعَاء. That's exactly what he did, right? The dua that he made. And so we should always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we want him to bless us with children, we don't just want any children, right? We want children that are righteous, right? Because the righteous children will only benefit us, right? Because if they're righteous, they'll make dua for us, right? If they're righteous, then whatever they do of hasanat is also in our scale of deeds on Day of Judgment, because you teach them, right? Or you were one of the causes of them learning, whether you send them to Quran, whatever the case is. Of course, Allah turns their heart to these things, right? So that becomes on your scale of deeds on the Day of Judgment, right? They'll make dua for you after you pass away. The Prophet ﷺ said, the son of Adam, when he dies, all his deeds are stopped except from three things, right? One of them is وَوَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ يَدْعُ لَهُ, a righteous child that makes dua for him. And subhanAllah, by the way, this has a meaning from both sides, right? That that the righteous child benefit you because he makes dua for you, but also for the child, one of the signs that you're righteous is they make you dua for your parents, right? It has that other meaning, hidden meaning associated with it. طيب إنه بشرك بيحيى مصدقا بكلمة من الله And then he said, وَسَيِّدًا. Right? A sayyid over here means what? What's a sayyid? Leader, right? A nobleman, right? So he's saying, Zakaria, you're going to be blessed with a child that would lead the people, right? Would lead them in knowledge and in action. Because that's what a true sayyid is. A true sayyid, a praiseworthy sayyid, is a person that leads in knowledge and in action, right? Having knowledge and no action is not an example, right? And having action without knowledge, you'll be led astray. You know, that's, subhanAllah, you just realize that this is like, talking about Bani Israel and the Christians, right? So Bani Israel, they might have knowledge, but there's no action. So they knew Prophet Muhammad was a prophet, but did they follow him? No, right? That's why they're the ones that Allah is angry with. When you have knowledge, you don't act upon it, you know what is right, you don't act upon it, that brings the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But then when you act without knowledge, how do you know what you're supposed to do? It's like the Christians. The Christians actually, subhanAllah, they want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're craving that spirituality, but they have no knowledge how to do it, so they make up things. And so they are dallin, they're astray. And similarly also in Islam, right? In Islam, when you have knowledge, you don't act upon it, you have that similarity with the Jews. But if you don't have knowledge and you start acting different things, you'll be led astray like the Christian. And so to be a true leader, right, you have to have knowledge, and that is supported by action, right? Knowledge, you gain that knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the Quran and the Sunnah, and you act upon it, right? And that's how we become true individuals who are worthy of being, leaders, right? Wallahu alam. طيب, so that is what is the second? Yahya, musaddiqan bi kalimat min Allah, wa sayyidan wa hasura, right? Hasur over here, that's the fourth description. Hasur over here, really, so the scholars of tafsir, they interpreted two meanings, right? The first one has to do with abstaining from getting married, right? Abstaining from getting married. Now, that meaning, right, many of the scholars of tafsir didn't think it's the correct meaning, because abstaining from marriage in itself is not necessarily a praiseworthy quality. But the second interpretation, right, is that it means that he withholds himself from the things that would anger Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that he withholds himself from, or protects himself from, sin, right? Hasura, which means to hold from something, right? To refrain from something. And so that would include all forms of sins or anything that would anger Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the word hasura over here in Arabic is called sighat mubalagha, an exaggerated form, right? So an exaggerated form of withholding, and it indicates really that a person, that exaggerated form is necessary to continuously live your life withholding from things, which means that it requires patience, right? Because you need to, defy your desires, right? You're constantly holding, right? You're holding yourself from indulging in a desire. So it requires strength and it requires patience, right? And so that's perhaps, Allah alam, the praiseworthy form. Now, if you look at this, a person can have a believing child, right? But that believing child can be engrossed in sin, right? Very heavily involved in sin. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He gave Zakaria alayhi salam that glad tidings, He told him he's a believing individual, but also who, kind of cleans himself or cleanses himself from or distances himself from sins, essentially, right? Right. So these were given in a row, right? إن الله يشرك بيحيى مصدقا بكلمة من الله وسيدا وحصورا, right? So over here he just said Yahya, he will follow, Isa ibn Maryam, which means he will be a believer. وسيدا, he will act to knowledge and act upon it, right? وحصورا, he'll refrain from bad things. So this is a rich, a very religious child. But then came that fifth aspect of the glad tiding, which is what? وَنَبِيًّا مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. Because the person says, he knows he's going to be a prophet, he has all these characteristics, but no, the glad tidings came in that order, right? Yahya, life, right? musaddiqan, believer, وسيدا, right, like action and knowledge, وحصورا, he exalts himself from sin. And then the last one, which is one of the best things of glad tidings, is where he is a وَنَبِيًّا مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ, right, a prophet from the righteous. And this one is the best and the greatest out of all the other ones that came before him, because it will include all of it, right? Because the highest level of righteousness is what? Prophethood. That's the peak of righteousness, right? The prophets alayhim salam were were the most righteous of individuals. And there's a reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose those individuals specifically. Allah knows who are the people who are most qualified, who are most pure, that are worthy of carrying that message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lead the individuals, lead the people. And so the most righteous of individuals, the people of taqwa in the world, are the prophets, right? Followed by as-siddiqeen. Followed by as-siddiqeen. So that station over here, is prophethood. But what's interesting over here is that when someone, when you look at this rizq, by the way, this is a rizq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving Zakaria alayhi salam, right? It's a rizq given alayhi salam, but it's also a rizq that is giving Yahya. Now, the scholars, when they talked about the different types of rizq, they said there's a worldly rizq, such as food, shelter, clothing, wealth, real estate, right? All those things are considered worldly rizq. And then there's another type of rizq, which is the religious, right? The religious aspect of rizq. Now, which one is the higher rizq? Quick, you should know the answer. Which one is the higher rizq? Which one is the better rizq? Religious rizq. Why? Of course, it's great to have both, right? It's great to have both. And there's no problem to ask for both. And this is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, right? وَمِنْهُمْ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, right? Those are righteous, they said, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيا حَسَنَةً, give us in this world حسنة, وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حسنة وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, right? So this is in Surah Al-Baqarah, where فَمِنْهُمْ يَقُولُ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيا وَمَا لَهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ خَلَقٍ وَمِنْهُمْ يَقُولُ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ أُولَئِكَ لَهُمْ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا كَسَبُوا, right? وَاللَّهُ سَرِيعُ الْحِسَابِ. So some people will say, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيا, oh Allah, give us in this world. وَمَا لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ خَلَقٍ, and they have no share in the hereafter. You don't want that, right? You don't want to keep asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give the worldly things, and that's what you care about. This is what you focus about. No. When you do that, then you have to realize you're an individual who's preoccupied by the world, who the world right now is in your heart, and that's it. And this is very important because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said He did not create a human. وَمَا جَعَلْنَا قَلْبَ رَجُلٍ مِنْ قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. We would not create a man with two hearts. That heart was created for something specific. It can only occupy, right, one thing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like associated with. So it'll either be occupied by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messenger and your cares the hereafter, or it'll be occupied by the desires and this world. You cannot have both, right? One will push out the other. And if you're only asking for worldly things, know that this is a sign that you're attached to this world. And it's a problem. Now, if you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this world and the hereafter, what you're doing is you're seeking the hereafter, and this world just becomes a means for that hereafter. You know, the Sahaba, when they ask for wealth, what do they ask wealth for? All right, the companions, the poor companions, they complained to the Prophet ﷺ one time. They said, Ya Rasulullah, ذهب أهل الدثور بالأجور. ذهب أهل الدثور بالأجور. They said, O Messenger of Allah, the people of wealth, right? The people of wealth, they went with all the reward. Now I want to understand the mindset. So they're talking about the other companions, the other Muslims, the Sahaba, who had wealth, they took all the reward. And so the Prophet, when he asked كيف ذلك, they said, يذكرون مثل ما نذكر. So they pray like we pray, they fast like we fast. They remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they give from their wealth. So why did the Sahaba accumulate that wealth? What's the purpose? To give, to fulfill their obligations, right? To spend on themselves, right? اليد العليا خير من اليد السفلى. The giving hand, right? The giving hand is better than the receiving hand. So they would want to fulfill the obligations, but also so that they would give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are individuals, they have the world in their hand and not in their hearts, right? And that's the example. That's why they were righteous at that level, right? Now, that's the complaint that came in. And so asking for the hereafter and this world, you have to remember why you're asking for it. Now, those who ask for this world only, that's what they're caring about, right? So that rizq is not the higher rizq. The higher rizq is the religious one. If Allah gave you a heart that desires the hereafter, a heart that's filled with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a heart that desires to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that is the best rizq you can ever have. And if you had to choose between one or the other, then choose the religious, because this world will end. No matter how much wealth you have, it will end. And our time frame compared to eternity is nothing, right? أتستبدلون أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى والعذاب بالمغفرة, right? Those who bought who sold the أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى. They bought the dalala and they sold huda, and they bought punishment and sold maghfirah. You don't do that, right? Some people buy this world, right? Buy this world and give up the hereafter. It should be the other way around, right? طيب. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He gives an individual, right, a believing child who's righteous, that is the best rizq you can ever have, right? The best rizq you can ever have. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the way, only gives the religious rizq to whomever He loves. That's another interesting point, right? Allah gives the worldly rizq to whomever He likes and dislikes. For example, He gave this worldly rizq to Dawood alayhi salam and Sulaiman, and He gave it to Fir'aun, right? And the Prophet said, if this world, if it had the weight of a wing of a insect in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if the value of it even was worth the wing of an insect in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then He would not have given a disbeliever in it a sip of water, right? That's the reality. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this world to whomever He loves and dislikes. But He only gives the religious rizq to the one that He loves. That's it, right? And so, I'll tell you this, wallah, it's a blessing that we're here today and everybody else might be distracted doing something else. We hope, inshallah, that whatever they are, that they're doing something that's beneficial for the hereafter. Ameen, right? But unfortunately, the reality is many of the Muslims have been deprived in being in masjids, have been deprived from doing things that would lead to the hereafter, have been distracted by their devices, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this a sign that we are among those people He chose. Say Ameen. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring the others that have not been here yet, to bring them with us. Ameen. Because we don't want them to be deprived. We want them to be with us, right? Because as Muslims, as believers, we love for our brothers what we love for ourselves, right? Wallahi, we'd hope this masjid is filled from here to the end, right? Nobody would dislike that, right? We're not going to benefit from it. We want their benefit. Wallahu a'lam. And so this is something we have to be aware of, is that we should not be overly joyed with the worldly rizq while our religious rizq is being restricted, right? We should care about the other one. We should look at how much we are in a masjid, how much we attain the circles of knowledge, the circles of dhikr. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا مَرَرْتُمْ بِرِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ فَارْتَعُوا. If you pass by the gardens of heaven, then sit. And so the companion asked, مَا هِيَ رِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ? What are the gardens of heaven? He said, حِلَقُ الذِّكْر, right? The circles of reminder, like the sessions of education and dhikr, reciting the Quran. That's the gardens of Allah on earth, right? The spirituality, as if you are, like your spirit is so high that you feel that sweetness, right? That you're so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is truly the part of Jannah in this world. He said, sit in it, right? And so we should try to be in those places because they are the best places for us. They'll cleanse our hearts. There's more reward. It will get us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Wallahu alam. طيب. And that's from the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So we always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq in this world and the hereafter. Ameen. Right? And by the way, subhanAllah, it is a blessing. Like you have to think about it sometimes. What have we done to deserve this, right? What have we done that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call us to His masjid? He stirs it in our hearts, for whatever reason it is. And subhanAllah, some people are brought, they're dragged into this place. This is also a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The angels, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks the angels, when people are sitting in a halqa, He asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the angels to forgive the people who are sitting. And they'll say here, there's a person that he did not come. He was just he's just with them. He did not come to learn. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, forgive him. Those are people that the people that sit with them will never be miserable. Right? Will never be miserable. So some people are just brought into this circle. Right? So Allah would forgive them. طيب. Now, once Zakaria, so those are 5 characteristics that were given to, glad tidings to Zakaria alayhi salam. Now, Zakaria alayhi salam, once he received that news, the wordings of what comes next, it shows like an astonishment, ta'ajjub from Zakaria. قال رب أن يكون لي غلام. How can I have a child? وقد بلغني الكبر وامرأتي عاقر. And I've reached an old age, and my wife is barren. It was mentioned in the books of Sikh that Yaqub Zakaria was about 120 years old, and his wife was 98. Right? Now, we have to pause for a second over here. We have to realize that the amazement, that ta'ajjub of Zakaria is not because he didn't believe that Allah is capable of doing anything. But it's like whenever there's any sort of a miracle or a karama that we experience, we're always amazed by it. That's what it means, right? It elevates us, it gives different, levels of certainty, right? So knowing that Allah is capable of everything, that's a level of certainty, right? Witnessing it happen to someone else is an extra level of certainty. You experiencing it is the highest level of certainty, right? The example, so this is ilm al-yaqeen, right? Ayn al-yaqeen, haqq al-yaqeen. So ilm al-yaqeen is based on knowledge. Like somebody describing to you this beautiful, honey, for example, right? Describes the color of it, the consistency of it, the sweetness of it, right? And then when you see it, you see that color, you see that consistency, your certainty increases. And then if you taste it, this is something else completely, right? So it doesn't mean you were not certain. And so over here, the ta'ajjub, the amazement of Zakaria alayhi salam is not because of, he doesn't believe, right? No, he believes. But it's the same as when Ibrahim alayhi salam asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَ. Show me how you raise the dead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِن. Don't you believe? He said, بَلَى. I do believe. وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. Right? So that my heart will be, in the highest level of yaqeen. And so this is what we're talking about over here, right? Essentially. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the message that was sent, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ كَذَلِكَ اللَّهُ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. Similar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does whatever He wills. And so then Yaqub alayhi salam asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him a sign when his wife gets pregnant. قال رب اجعل لي آية. Right? I need to, I want to know when my wife is going to get pregnant. And so he told him, right? He said, آياتك ألا تكلم الناس 3 أيام إلا رمزا. And so that sign that's going to happen, that your wife got pregnant, is that you will be incapable of speaking. Like your tongue will not. If you want to speak, you won't be able to speak. For how many days? 3 days. For 3 days. إلا رمزا, but you'll be able to sign. Now there's an exception. Whenever you want to speak to somebody with worldly things, that's what's going to happen. But when it comes to tasbih and dhikr, you'll be able to do it. Right? You'll be able to do it. That's the sign. But so what's interesting is that some of the scholars had mentioned, right? What is the relation? Like, what's the suitability or relationship between that, the tongue being knotted, right? And like, the whole pregnancy happening. And so they said the relation or the similarity is that the one that, like, that is capable of untying the knot in your tongue is similarly capable to untie the barrenness of your wife. Right? To release that, like, the prevention of the speaking, it's released. Similar, being barren, it can also be released. And they said that's the similarity between the sign that was asked and the pregnancy that was gonna happen. Right? Wallahu alam. And then inshallah that concludes what we wanted to cover with Zakaria alayhi salam from the Quran. And maybe perhaps, like, next week we'll do Yahya alayhi salam. Not the full story of Yahya. We'll see, we might do it. We'll see how, we'll play it by ear, see how it goes inshallah. But I think we'll stop here inshallah. I think we're doing good timing. Sheikhna, good time? Alhamdulillah. I don't know how many minutes we were. Yes. Yes. So he said them doing, like, to say certain dhikr, right? But what ended up happening is that the rich people found out about it. And so they started doing the same thing. And so they went to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, they told him they're doing now the same thing that we're doing. And so he said, ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ, right? So that's the, like, the fadl of Allah, He gives it to whomever He wills. But we also have to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can reward, and the Prophet informed in this obviously in other teachings, that whomever, like, doesn't have wealth, but intended that if he had wealth, he would do to something like this and that, like, he'd do like this person and spend it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will give him the same reward. Right? Because Allah is generous. What matters is the intention. Right? What matters is the intention. And it's a sincere intention. The Prophet said, "Ad-dunya li arba." This world is for 4 people. The world is 4 people. رجل أعطاه علم ومال. Right? رجل أعطاه علم ومال. ورجل أعطاه علم ولم يؤتيه مال. ورجل أعطاه مال ولم يؤتيه علم. ورجل لم يعطيه علم ولا مال. And so a person that Allah gave him knowledge and wisdom and wealth. And a person Allah gave him knowledge and wisdom but no wealth. And then a person Allah gave him wealth but no knowledge or wisdom. And a person that Allah gave him no knowledge, nor wisdom, nor wealth. Those are the 4 types of people, right? This world is 4. He said that first one, that Allah gave him wisdom and wealth, he spends his wealth in the ways that please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And the one that Allah gave him wisdom but no wealth, he says, if I had like this person, I would do exactly the same thing. And so they in both are the same in reward. And then the third one, who has wealth but no wisdom, he utilizes that wealth in the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the last one, who has no knowledge, like no wisdom, nor wealth, he says, if I had like this one that spends it in the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would do the same. And so he said, they are both in sin, like they will get the same reward in sin. And those are the 4 categories. If you think about it, there's no other category, right? So this world, whether it's given to you or not, right? And the wisdom that Allah gives you, bestows upon you, or He doesn't. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, like, give us the wisdom, the wisdom to be able to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the wisdom to see what's correct for us and to follow it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us wealth that we can utilize for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we seek refuge from ignorance, and we seek refuge from a wealth that would displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us what benefits us and what benefits us from what we learn. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to walk in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to walk in the footsteps of the Sahaba radhiyallahu anhum. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to resurrect us on the Day of Judgment with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to allow us to enter Jannah without any sort of reckoning or punishment. Ameen. Jazakumullah khair for that question, Shaykh. You know when I was saying it, it was in my mind, but I forgot. Subhanallah. Jazakumullah khair. Any questions? We have chai, Shaykh?